We're going to be using a database to store our employee payroll data. So databases are a way of storing data that can be accessed by multiple users from anywhere. The database we'll be using in our project is MySql, and let's set up a local MySql server in our computer. So in Google, we can just search MySql installer, and we're just going to select the first one. We don't have to sign up, so we can just skip it. So I'm going to select the custom option. I don't want all the products. The only product I want is just the server and the Workbench. So from the server, I'm just going to select the server 8. And let's just do the latest one. And for our application, just a Workbench. Okay, so I'm just going to hit next. I'm going to keep everything as default. All right, so this is development computer that we're using. So it's going to use very little memory. So it's going to keep everything as default here. Let's keep a password simple. So over here, so basically this option tells us like every time we start our computer, automatically bring up the MySql server. So again, it's our choice if you want to do that or not. So I'm going to keep it at default. So now we can actually connect to our database or our server, and my password was test. All right, so our server is up and running. And we can see it here as well. We can even stop the server if we want to. Okay, so the next step that we're gonna do is we want to create a new database. So we're gonna click on this sign over here, create a new schema. And let's call our database payroll DB. All right, so our database is created and we can view it over here. So if you go to schemas here, we can see our new database is created. Now let's actually create a new user. So we're gonna head over to server and we're gonna click users and privileges. So instead of having root user, we want to create a new user with limited access. Root has access to everything. So we're gonna create a new account and let's call this payroll user. And it's going to be localhost, and password we'll just say testing123. All right, so our new user is created, and let's give it some roles. So for now, I'm just going to give it a DBA role just to make it easier for ourselves. So DBA has access to all of them, so they can alter the table, create, drop, update, delete, anything. So we're going to give him access to all of it for now. All right, that's done. So now our new user and our database is created, and let's see how we can use it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a local application properties file. And actually, let me delete these two. We don't need this. All right, so the way that we're going to structure this is in our local properties file, we're going to use a H2 in-memory database. And in our main application properties file, we're going to use the MySql database. So Spring Boot is pretty powerful with writing minimal amount of code and using these configuration properties file. And this is where Spring JPA can really help us. We need to specify the database source, so where it's connecting to. So we have this property, Spring Data Source. And here we just need to specify that we are using the in-memory H2 database. And we need to specify the name of our database. So we created a new database called payroll DB. So Spring Boot gives us the option on how to initialize our database schema and data through the JPA module. We can specify the DDL or schema generation on startup against our database. And the property for this is spring.jpa hibernate.ddl. And since this is our local development properties file that we're using, we can just set it to create. So what the create option will do is it's going to drop the schema and recreate it. And in production, ideally, we should set this to none because we should always review all the database changes that we're pushing out. The next that we're going to do is, so H2 in-memory database comes with a very nice GUI, so we can enable that. So the properties for that are the following. All right, so our local properties files are set up for our in-memory H2 database. Now let's set up our connection string for our MySQL database that we created. So we're going to do that in the application properties file, and we're going to do the same thing. We need to specify the database URL for it, or the connection string. And for that, instead of using H2, we're using MySQL. And we are connecting to localhost. And we're running our SQL server on port 3306. And the name of our database is PayrollDB. And we can see it all over here. So we created this, our SQL server, which is running on port 3306. And the name of our database is PayrollDB that we created previously. Now, since we also created a new user, which was payroll user, we need to specify the username that has access to this database. The name of the user that we created was payroll user. And we need to specify the password as well. And same thing, we're going to copy this part. And instead of doing a create, we're going to do an update. So we don't want to drop our tables. We only need to perform an update. So if there's any new columns or new changes to the schemas that we made, we should just update it right away. And now this one important part that we need to specify is this dialect. So this is where Spring JPA is very powerful. So we can easily plug in any database that we want. But we need to specify like what type of database that we're using. Are we using MySQL or Postgres or our SQL server? We need to specify a dialect. So it generates these SQL queries according to that database. So for that, we have this property. And it is called org.hibernate. And since we're using MySQL, we're going to use this MySQL dialect. And this is pretty much it. Now, if you want to use this local properties file, we need to tell Spring Boot to use it. To do that, we go over here, we click on Edit Configuration, and we can just apply a program argument. So it's the properties, the command for that is spring.profile.active. And we can specify use a local properties file. Now, if you want to use just a main properties file, we can leave this blank. So we can remove that, and we can use a main properties file. But for now, let's just use a local where we're going to be using the in-memory H2 database.